my name is Macy and welcome back to my channel. And on this channel we recreate fun recipes but make them dairy-free or plant-based. And on today's episode, we are actually making Tasty's Mushroom Wellington. So let's get started. We're going to need an apron. Step 1 says to preheat your oven to 375. And then we're going to be prepping our ingredients. So let's get our cutting board. Here it is. To start off, we're going to need 16 ounces of cremini or portobello mushrooms. I have this big thing of mushrooms. It's actually 24 ounces, so we're just going to be using 2/3 of it. Add the mushrooms to a food processor and pulse until crumbly, about 10 to 12 times. Now, I don't have a food processor, so we're going to be using a blender, and we're just going to pulse it in the blender that way. So I grabbed my blender, and now we're going to go ahead and put in our 16 ounces of cremini mushrooms. And like I said, I'm just using 2/3 of this container because I got it from Costco, and this is just the size that it is. But you guys can feel free to use whatever brand of mushrooms you want or whatever blender or food processor you have, as this is what I'm doing as well. I actually think that I may wash the mushrooms that I decide to use. So I'll come back when everything is washed and put back in the blender. I went ahead and washed the mushrooms that I'm going to be using and put the ones I will not be using in an airtight container. So now on to the next step. It says to crumble for 10 to 12 times. So that's what we're going to do. About 10 pulses. Chop our onion. So we are going to need 1 onion thinly sliced. And before we do this, I'm actually going to fetch myself a garbage bowl so I don't have to keep walking out of frame into the garbage can. Our thinly sliced onion, and I'm just cutting them into rings just to make them a little bit thinner. Alright, so we just cut our onions and now we're going to prep our garlic. We need 3 cloves of garlic minced, and so we are actually going to be using 4 cloves just because I love extra garlic. So now that we have the garlic minced and the onions chopped, we're going to go ahead and start our saute on the stove. We're going to start off by heating the stove over a medium heat, drizzling in some olive oil. And then this is just going to cook down. Now we're going to be adding our onions. So we can saute everything over medium heat until the onions are translucent. Then once they are translucent, we'll be adding our minced garlic. Alright, so it is about time to add our 1/4 cup of vegetable broth. And we're just going to saute until the liquid is almost all gone and the onions have been translucent, so we can add our garlic. About time to add our minced garlic, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And we will continue to stir until the mixture is fragrant. And then we will add in our mushrooms as well as our soy sauce. The mixture is definitely very fragrant now, so I think I'm going to go ahead and add in the soy sauce and mushrooms. First, we'll start with the soy sauce. We need 2 tablespoons of that. Now you can eyeball it. I'm just measuring it exactly just because for the purpose of the video and testing the recipe to a T. And here I am adding my mushrooms that we blended in the food processor. We're just going to cook these until most of the liquid has cooked out of the pan. The step of cooking the mushrooms until their liquid has evaporated takes about 10 to 12 minutes. So after that, then we will go ahead and add in our spinach to wilt. So just prepping our thyme. This is how I do it. I just go against the grain of the leaves and they just come off the stem. Most of the time. That one was just a bad one. But like that. Just go against the grain of the leaves. I say this is about a tablespoon. It might even be 2 tablespoons. Alright, so I think we're going to go ahead and make the well in the middle of our pan. And we're going to add more olive oil to the center of the well. Alright. And then we're going to go ahead and add our thyme, the center, just like so. Alright, it's starting to get very fragrant, so I'm just going to go ahead and incorporate the thyme into the rest of the mixture, and we'll get ready to add our spinach. I think this is a good amount of spinach. It all cooks down like really quickly, so it's not actually this much. I'm sure you guys know. This dish smells super delicious. So if you guys do decide to make it, you will definitely be able to smell the aromatics that are coming off of this dish. And then once the spinach has been sauteed, then we'll be ready to construct our puff pastry Wellington. Spinach is still wilting down, so I think we're going to go ahead and prep our potatoes for the Wellington. And so the recipe says to cut the potatoes into thin slices, and you need 2 medium potatoes. I'm just going to double check that real quick. Yes. So I do not have a mandolin, so we're going to have to slice this by hand. So they may not be as thin as the recipe may have wanted, but that's going to be the best we're going to have to do. So I'm going to go ahead and wash these and come right back. Alright, here are our washed potatoes, and let's go ahead and slice them thinly. I'm just going to cut the ends off, and we won't really need those. And we'll just slice as thin as we can get. And I'll come back once the potatoes are fully sliced. So this spinach is looking nicely wilted, and I think it might be ready for us to take it off the stove to get ready to prepare our Wellington. After we wilt the spinach, we're gonna get a baking sheet, an 18 by 13 inch. I'm just gonna get the biggest one that I have. And that we are going to spray it with a non-stick spray. Alright, so here's our baking sheet, and we're gonna go ahead and spray it with our non-stick spray. I'm using an avocado oil non-stick spray, but you feel free to use whatever you like. Alright, and so now it says that we need to get a lightly floured surface to roll out our puff pastry dough. And you want to make sure your puff pastry dough was thawing out for a little bit so it is not hard and frozen when you try to roll it out. So we're going to go ahead and move this to the side and get our flour surface ready. I am just using this Pepperidge Farms puff pastry dough, which happens to be dairy-free, so that is super helpful because I do not know how to make my own puff pastry dough. So this is super helpful. And so the recipe is saying to roll it out 1 sheet to fit the size of the baking sheet. So that is what we're going to do. We're going to grab one of the sheets, and I'm going to go ahead and just keep the second one for extra to freeze again for another recipe. Alright, so let's go ahead and roll this out. And we're just going to roll it out. transfer it into the baking sheet. Somehow, we'll get it to work. Alrighty. Oh, perfect. This is like the perfect size. Okay, get rid of this. Right, so now in the center third of the pastry, we're going to add our layer of potato slices. I'm just gonna pick the thinnest ones that we have here because some of them are a little bit thicker than others and I don't want them to not be cooked. So we're just gonna add a nice layer. I think about 3 potatoes wide is a good idea. That looks good. And then just do this all the way down. Split this down the middle. That looks good. About half, like so. Oops. And we're just gonna go ahead and put this on top of the potatoes. And then spread it out evenly on top of the potatoes. So that is what I will do. All right, so this is about as even as it's gonna get, I feel. And the next step says to about 3/4 of an inch thick. Sure. And then we're gonna add another layer of potatoes with the rest of the mushrooms. So we're gonna go ahead and do another little layer of potatoes. We're just gonna scoop that on top of this layer of potatoes. We are going to top with one more layer of potatoes. So I'm gonna find like my thinnest potatoes for this because I only have some like thick ones left and I don't know how that will fare out. So this layer will just not look super duper pretty, but it is the best that I was able to do. It is now saying to fold one side of the pastry over the filling and then the other side. So that's what we're going to do. Folds pretty easily, so that's good. And that looks pretty delicious actually, and it folded quite nice. And now it is saying to seal the top and the bottom ends over the filling and score the top of the Wellington with a sharp knife with diagonal lines. So to seal it, I guess I'm just gonna like fold over the puff pastry and like squeeze the ends. And we're gonna score with diagonal lines with a sharp knife. I'm just gonna do 3, I think. I don't know how many you should do, but 3 looks cool. And then now it is saying in a ramekin or small bowl, we're gonna combine the non-dairy milk with the remaining tablespoon of olive oil and brush over the Wellington. I'm gonna mix this together. Just kind of scooping it and then just rubbing it in. Let's do Wellington so it can breathe. And then it says to bake for 35 to 40 minutes until golden brown and puffed. So we're gonna bring it into the oven now. All right, so we're gonna transport our Wellington into the oven. This is what it looks like pre-bake. It's going in the oven and we'll start. All right, so while this puff pastry is baking, I'm gonna clean up our station and then I think we're gonna make the gravy to go on top of it. I had found a separate recipe to make a vegan brown gravy, so we're gonna go ahead and do that. And so we're just gonna use the same pan that we made the mushrooms in, just because it'll have that nice mushroomy, garlicky flavor that we cooked with earlier. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. I found this recipe, and of course, all the recipes that I used today will be linked in the description of this video. So let's go ahead and make this gravy. So the first step says to put everything into the saucepan except for the butter. So you'll see me go ahead and do that now. So we're gonna go ahead and add our 2 cups of vegetable broth. We're gonna go ahead and add that in. A spoon of soy sauce. There's 1 and 2. Just 1 tablespoon. Our oregano, and I'm just gonna estimate a teaspoon. That's probably good. And then our Italian seasoning. That's probably good. And then our fresh thyme, which this is the same thyme that I used for the Wellington. And I'm just gonna de-sprig it. So I added 3 sprigs of thyme. And then next on the list, it says to add a half a teaspoon of onion powder. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. And so I'm just gonna do a quick little dash, just like that. And I think that will work fine. And we're just gonna put this over medium heat to dissolve the cornstarch and stirring frequently. And then also the gravy would absorb some of the residual flavor, like I said earlier, from the garlic and the onions and the mushrooms that we had sauteed in this pan already. So it's kind of like if you're making a non-vegan beef Wellington, using the meat drippings from that, we'll be using the mushroom drippings from this for this gravy. It's a little bit darker than it was just a second ago. All right, so the gravy has started to bubble a little bit. So we're gonna go ahead and bring it down to a simmer and stir consistently for 30 seconds. Also making some green beans in the background as a side dish. So you can go ahead and just ignore the background sizzling. But essentially these green beans are just green beans seasoned with some soy sauce, ponzu, chili sesame oil, and some squeezy ginger. This is one of my favorite ways to eat green beans, and I needed to use these up, so we're just going to include these as well. And it says after stirring for 30 seconds, we're going to want to turn off the heat and then add our vegan butter and stir until the butter has been incorporated. And we're using 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm just using an olive oil based butter. So I think it's been about 30 seconds of consistent stirring. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the heat, add in the butter. Here is a final cut slice of the Wellington. This is the inside. It looks pretty good. And then we're just gonna drizzle it with some of this gravy. Do a taste test of this Wellington. It looks super delicious. I think it came out really nice and well. And so let's get a little corner here to taste. And dip it in some of that gravy. Yum. This is really good. You taste a lot of the onion and the garlic. It's very onion and garlic heavy, but it's really nice. And then like the gravy adds a really nice saltiness to the flavoring. Overall, I'd say this is a really great dish. So that is all for today. So I hope you like and subscribe and leave a comment of what you'd like to see in the future from me. Other than that, have a great day. Bye.